Give Mr. Cain the floor. Mr. Cain.
Madam Speaker, I seek leave of the Assembly to make my inaugural speech.
Is leave granted, members? Yes. Mr. Cain.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I'm greatly honoured to present myself to the ACT Legislative Assembly and to the ACT community as a member for the Ginninderra electorate. I would like to especially acknowledge the Ngunnawal and other Indigenous peoples of this and all ACT electorates. I also acknowledge that we meet on Ngunnawal land. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself, my upbringing, my family, my work, my developing political awareness, and I hope you see me not just as a fellow MLA, but as someone you feel confident to approach for a respectful conversation. I was born in the Hunter Valley into low socioeconomic circumstances. My family never owned a car, and in one of our rented homes, we burned coal in an open fireplace for warmth. In my primary school years, my cousins, friends and I had great enjoyment exploring abandoned mining equipment and infrastructure, though we wisely avoided crossing fields covered or buried with slow-burning coke and coal deposits. Most of my high school years were spent living in an igloo village, and I say that with respect, in West Cessnock, reserved mostly for new Australians. The common name for this housing estate was the Migrant Village. And I say igloo village because our home, like most others, was in the shape of a half-cylinder made from corrugated iron, erected on stumps and laid on its sides. I had great pleasure from regular trips to the beaches at and near Newcastle and spent several school breaks picking grapes in the vineyards of the Pacolban region. One of my fondest memories, and a likely explanation for my love of all things science fiction, was watching Star Trek with my mother, something I'm glad to say we are still able to enjoy together today. I studied to be a teacher and graduated with an honours degree in mathematics at Newcastle University, followed by a Diploma of Education. One of my earliest political observations was seeing and hearing Sir Robert Menzies on our black and white TV. As I watched how he presented himself and spoke, I just thought, that's an impressive individual. What also impressed me about the Liberal tradition, primitive though was my understanding, was the acknowledgement of the conscience vote, which in my mind recognised that the individual had an entitlement to their own personal vision and values, and the permission to express those, even if the majority of their colleagues thought otherwise. The most impacting experience of my university days was meeting and being immediately smitten by my wife Claire, who was also studying to be a teacher, a career in which she continues today. I taught mathematics in New South Wales schools from 1978 until Claire and I took our two New South Wales-born children to South Australia, where I taught in a non-government school, becoming its principal for part of our time there. While there, we built our first home and added 3 daughters to our family. We moved to Canberra in 1990, Claire carrying our 6th child. I was principal of the school here until 1998. And during this time, we had our 7th child and purchased our current home in Everett. Fortunately, a largish house on a largish block. My school responsibilities sometimes brought me into contact with lawyers. And while this next statement may surprise some, I liked what I saw. So not because I lost my interest in education, I began a law degree in 1999. And after graduating with honours, began working in the ACT government in 2002. For much of my time since 2011, I managed the ACT's tax disputes section, objections and appeals, well known to our Chief Minister, which was located within the Treasury stream of the Chief Minister's Directorate. Claire and I were temporarily empty nesters from late 2015 after our youngest daughter's marriage. We are currently blessed with 6 grandchildren, 3 with Anglo-Indian heritage, 3 with Anglo-Indigenous heritage. Our 7th child and youngest daughter will soon deliver our 7th grandchild. Leading up to the 2016 ACT election, I thought that the Canberra Liberals would surely win. As we know, this did not happen, and I thought, how could they have not won that election? I also started to see a distressing decline in how issues were discussed in the public arena, including the rise of accusatory and insulting language that was intended, or so it seemed to me, to prevent exploration of differing ideas and intimidate into silence those with a contrary view, rather than to engage openly and respectfully. I was becoming very worried for our society. What occurred to me then and has crystallised strongly with me now is that the best government policies arise from free and open discussion. The desire to shut down and deplatform differing opinions is contrary, in my view, to the fundamental Westminster principles of our parliamentary democracy. In late 2016, I made the decision to join the Canberra Liberals, my first party membership. My goal in joining was to do everything I could to ensure that the Canberra Liberals were elected in October 2020. And while this did not eventuate, this remains my priority for 2024. I then put my mind, time, feet and hands to work, including many letterboxing contributions, telephone canvassing and attending party meetings and functions. I've held deputy chair roles on 3 committees. For the federal election last year, I ran a booth and scrutinised the vote count. From July last year, I was the chair of the Yerrabee electorate branch, which provided me with membership of the management committee. My journey continued with me being pre-selected as one of 5 very dedicated Ginninderra candidates. And of course, I'm very honoured at becoming the 84th individual to be called a member of the ACT Legislative Assembly. On the professional side, with the ACT government, I've dealt with the most legally and factually complex territory tax cases of the last 10 years, as both a decision maker and as an instructing client when the dispute moves to the tribunals or courts. I'm a nationally accredited mediator, and while working at the local tribunal, conducted over 60 civil and residential tenancy settlement conferences. I recently completed 3 years as Vice President of the ACT Law Society and had the great privilege of chairing for nearly 7 years the Law Society's Government Law Committee. I initiated as a member of the ADR Committee a pilot program for a pro bono mediation scheme. I am deeply committed to core Liberal Party values. The most effective government is the one that is barely noticed, that citizens are free to enhance their own lives and that of their family and community. The quiet Australians are a very capable bunch. Work is a wonderful benefit and the best form of supporting oneself and one's family. The freedom to have sensible, reasonable and respectful discussions about our differences is a freedom essential to our democratic system of government and to a civil society. Sound economic management is essential to increasing prosperity and a sign of responsible government. Every individual has value, irrespective of differences one from another, whether those differences be of gender, age, colour or creed. And there is incredible potential for good in every human life. It is my chief desire to see that the interests of residents of my Ginninderra electorate, particularly the vulnerable, are brought before this government's ministers and before this Assembly. My priority is to ensure that the residents of this electorate receive the services they deserve. I want to express my appreciation for those who worked so hard on my campaign. I'm indebted to my friends, supporters, volunteers and Brains Trust, quote unquote, under the leadership of an outstanding campaign executive, headed by an incredibly capable campaign manager. And I welcome many of them here with me this afternoon. As with many of us, I'm sure, my greatest encouragement came from my family, including my mother, my 3 sisters and their families, and I want to acknowledge their love and support. My greatest thanks go, though, to my wife Claire, with whom I have journeyed over many years, and who has been and remains my primary support and most important counsel. I'm looking to hold the government to account for its use of taxpayer money, which it holds in trust to deliver quality services to the community. This will be a particular focus in my shadow portfolios. I will make myself available to you, my fellow MLAs, to discuss our common ground and differences. In closing, I hope to provide practical outcomes for my electorate and will continue to make myself available to understand and address their issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.